It takes a lot of courage to do what we are doing, to stand our ground in faith as we watch the virus continue to slowly spread around us. We watch the news, we wash our hands, we try to take every precaution. We go on with our lives, but we never get over the uneasy feeling that something is prowling around out there. Something dangerous to those we love. In times like this, we may wish that faith was magic, that we had some incantation or amulet that would protect us. But faith resides within reality, within our fragile bodies that are susceptible to disease. There will be an inoculation one day soon. But in the meantime, it takes a lot of courage to do what we are doing. We are facing reality with reality. The virus is strong, but so is our determination to face it. We will be agents of hope in these dark days of waiting. We will help others to prepare. We will share good information and ideas. We will exercise our common sense and our intelligence. And we will do one thing more. We will pray. Not because we believe prayer is magic, but because we know prayer is courage. It is the voice of a people who will not give up, run away, or hide in denial. It is the voice of hope against the whispers of fear. Yes, it takes a lot of courage to do what we are doing, and it will take a lot of prayer. But we are doing it, and we will go on doing it until this tide of shadows is forced to withdraw and our families are safe once more. In this community, open to every person of every walk of life, we stand our ground. We stand together in faith and in prayer. We stand in courage to witness to a power greater than the virus will ever be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first Worship with Bravery. My name is Yuri Rodriguez, and I'm Director of Latin American Music at Christ Church Cathedral. And I've been working at Christ Church for about 7 years. At Christ Church, we've been exploring a lot of different and creative ways of making music and making worship in many different ways. And we've realized that exploring our identity has been one of the greatest things that has happened, and is one of the greatest sources of vitality for our congregation and for our choirs. And today I have 5 great guests, people that I love and care so much for. I call them my musicians, but they're not really mine. And I would like to ask them to introduce themselves one by one. Perhaps we can start with Petar.
My name is Petar Jankovic. I am originally from Serbia in Eastern Europe.
Petar, your microphone went mute.
Yeah?
Yeah, now you're back. I can hear you now, sorry. If you want to start again?
Yeah. From the top, right?
Yes.
My name is Petar Jankovic. I am from Serbia, from Eastern Europe. I came to the United States a little over 20 years ago. And currently I'm professor at Jacob School of Music and a touring artist. And I am a hired musician for the Latin American congregation at Christ Church Cathedral.
Thank you, Petar. How about we go on with Daniel?
Hi, Yuri.
Hi, Daniel.
So my name is Daniel Duarte. I am from Brazil, originally from Brazil. I also came to the U.S. Many years ago. And I came here to study music, end up staying. And as Petar, he's my colleague at IU. I'm also faculty there. Also a touring artist. We play together at church and outside of church as well. And I've been playing at the Christ Church Cathedral for almost 7 years, I believe. Accompanying the Coro Latinoamericano, the Latin American choir. And that's a little bit of what I do.
Fantastic. Thank you, Daniel. Stephany, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am Stephany Cohen. I come from Colombia, a city called Cali. And I am the percussionist for the Coro. I love to play with everybody there. And I just graduated from IU with a master's in performance. So right now I'm just at that point where I have to figure out what to do next. But I will be still playing with the Coro, that's for sure. And yeah, that's what I do.
Thank you, Stephany. Paulo, tell us about yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Paulo Castro. I'm also from Brazil, and I've been here for a little over 11 years. Came here to do my master's at Butler University, and been here since then. I'm a choral director in town, working with mainly several high schools, and other organizations like the Symphony, Indianapolis Students Choir, and churches. And I've been with Christ Church Cathedral for almost a year and a half as a staff singer, and I've been a guest music director and an assistant in other capacities as well.
Thank you, Paulo. That's fantastic. Bruno, you want to tell us a little bit about you?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Bruno, and I'm also from Brazil. I'm a vocalist. I'm a baritone, so I'm an opera singer. I'm currently doing my doctorate in voice performance at IU. I came to the US 8 years ago to do my bachelor's, and then I did my bachelor's, my master's, and now doing my doctorate. I'm also an assistant instructor in voice performance at IU. And I've joined the choir actually at Christ Church Cathedral 6 years ago. First with Yuri, with the Hispanic choir, and then I was stolen in a good way by the other choir. So I started also working with the choir of men and choristers in the morning. So I do the services also in English in the morning and in the afternoon on Sundays with the Hispanic choir, and I absolutely love it.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Bruno. And you saw that we just have Venus joining us. Venus is one of our singers, and I'm going to ask Venus to please introduce yourself. Tell us your name. How long have you been working with Christ Church Cathedral? What you do with us? And anything else that you would like to add about what you do musically here in Indiana?
Thank you, Yuri. I'm sorry I'm late. My name is Venus Hernandez, or Venus Hernandez. I am from Monterrey, Mexico, and I have been with Christ Church Cathedral since 2014 as one of the staff singers. I'm a soprano. I also studied at IU. I did my master's there. So yes, I also studied opera, but I love to sing pretty much all kinds of repertoire, and I absolutely adore working at CCC. I love the community. I love the music that we do. I think it is so important to have that kind of niche and have that kind of singing experience, as well as anything else classical that we have to study. It's completely essential, and I'm so happy to be a part of it.
Thank you so much, Venus. Thank you. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. So one of the things that catches my attention before we start talking about more theological things, one of the things that catches my attention is that we talk about how Christ Church Cathedral has this niche, if you want to call it, of Latin American music. However, you are all classical musicians. We are all trained classical musicians. What do you tell people when they say, how do you do that? How do you cross over? How dare you? Who wants to share something about that?
I can share some about that. Yeah, I think it's, like talking about Latin American culture in general. I think most Latin American musicians, and especially guitarists, they start playing, bossa nova, choro, kind of like more in Brazil. I'm talking Brazil, more in the popular, and then because that has a little bit of classical music here and there, you end up going to that direction. You spend years learning that, and then at the end, you mix that with your origins pretty much. So I think for Latin American musicians, it's a pretty natural transition in a way, actually, to be able to do a little bit of both, and at some point start mixing them. And I think especially when you leave your native country, you tend to look back and try to maybe revisit some of the things you did when you're living there with your family, friends, and your, heritage. So I think it's a mixture of this, at the beginning already having, the mix, because really Latin American music comes from the polka, comes from, the Spanish music, comes from the waltz, comes from so many different European sources that the seeds of the Latin American style is already in there. So it's multicultural in that sense. So I think it's kind of natural, actually, for us to do that.
Thank you, Daniel. Venus, did you want to add something?
Well, yes, basically. I actually, when I think of classical music, it's something that I honestly didn't start to do until much later in my life. I feel like I started with Latin American music since childhood. As a Latin American, it is definitely part of my roots. I've been singing rancheras since I was 5 years old. That's just something you did if you could. And even if you couldn't in Mexico, So it's just something that happened. And it's such an ingrained part of our psyche as Mexicans. You have to sing, and it's not something that ever goes away. I actually have found that technically, especially for men, maybe not so much for women because there's a lot of belting, but even then, honestly, the style that you see or the type of singing that you train for in opera can very much be used in, at least in Mexican, folkloric music. That kind of support, that kind of space, that kind of sound can really be honed to produce that kind of music. So it's really very natural and not at all surprising that it can be applied, that an opera singer can do this. I mean, you see singers like Plácido Domingo who do this kind of music all the time. So it's honestly not that large of a jump. And for anybody who says, how dare you, I say, how dare you limit it?
That's right. Thank you. That's fantastic. Thank you. I love that. So when we talk about worship with bravery, which is what we've been singing a lot about, I realized that we started mixing a lot of music styles. How do you feel about that? How do you feel when our music styles come together? How do you feel about bringing maybe in one same service Spanish and English, but also Latin American rhythms and Anglican traditional hymns? How do you feel about that? What does that make you feel? Or when do you feel it's a really good mix? When do you feel really good about it? Bruno.
Yeah, I particularly, Judy, I think it goes back with the first question that you asked about popular music, because for me, it's almost like as a musician, I'm being trained. Like I have something else than my friends who are just at the conservatoire, just studying classical music. So when I go to church, I can sing Handel, we can sing Bach, and then we are singing some rhythm from Colombia in the same service. So it's almost like one extra skill that you're adding to my classically trained, let's say, background. And when it comes, and the whole idea of the classical music and popular music like mixing together, just like Venus mentioned, I don't think they're too far from each other, because you look at Mozart, you look at Bela Bartok, you look at Dvorak, you look at Copland, they all went back to popular music to get material to write classical music. So what we are doing is just literally a huge showcase of praising Lord, worshiping with different rhythms and words in different languages. So.
Thank you, Bruno. I wonder if maybe Petar or Paulo would like to add anything to that. Petar?
Yes. Well, I am classically trained musicians from early age. I didn't come out of the popular tradition when I was a kid. I started with classical guitar, official musical training in Eastern Europe. However, I have never had clear distinction on styles in that sense that you would ever say that sentence, how dare you something. For me, since the very beginning, music was a music, and different styles, of course, that require different idioms, different techniques, but none of them would be any trip outside of the basic concepts, which is expressivity, right? And functional stylistic framework within which you have to work. So it's more of applying your talents and abilities and education to anything that is needed within your line of work. And as a musician, I don't think that there is any style of work that I wouldn't do at that level. How dare you do or not do? It will be more, can I do it? Am I capable of grasping the concepts, learning them, and applying my talents to it, rather than whether I'm allowed or not allowed to do. So I've never really had that distinction. Well, I mean, I have distinction of the styles, what is popular music, what is not, what is jazz and what is not, but not to the level that it would prevent me from doing it. It was always mostly really what I like doing. And this is a music that I like. I mean, that's first and foremost. I wouldn't do it if I didn't like it. And out of that came the everything else. And maybe because guitarists, as Daniel said, are very close to the repertoire and the language already by the nature of the instrument. But besides that, I've done other styles that are not that close to classical guitar, and with the same attitude. If I like something, I would apply myself, learn as much as I can, and use my talents and education and try to do the best job I can.
Thank you, Petar. Paulo or Stephany, would you like to respond to any of these things that you're hearing?
Yeah, I would like to share something. For me, music is a language, and it's a way of, I truly believe that, to communicate, to connect. And when we talk about music in worship, it's been a journey throughout my life, because growing up, I, fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not sure, but I grew up in a tradition where music at church is sacred music. We don't bring rhythms and popular and all that stuff. And so it's been a journey over the years for me to relearning that, and learning that as a language, you have to find ways to connect with people, and bringing, using that as a conduit to the means you're trying to do, which in this case is worship. So, but I think as long as we are smart, meaning like in the service, what rhythms or what time, what moment you're going to use this instead of the other one, or whatever you're doing, you should use dance and different instruments and different rhythms. And also, especially nowadays, especially our generation, I feel like the world out there has so much happening visually and sounds, and there's so much happening. Why would we stay to one single way of doing anything, to be honest? And so I truly believe that for music is real too, and especially in worship, it needs to be explored, and it needs to be connected in different ways, because it's going to talk to different people in different ways.
Thank you, Paulo. Stephany.
Yeah, so I like many others, was also trained classically first, pretty much. I mean, I grew up listening to popular music, but I wasn't playing it. I was just dancing it or singing it or just listening. And so it's funny because I went to a conservatory back home, and they did teach some world music, which I hate that term. And I didn't learn that from Colombia. Like, I was so far away from the popular tradition. And it wasn't until I came here that I explored Afro-Cuban music. And as a result, of course, went back to salsa because I grew up with it. And then here at IU, even more, because then I started playing, I mean, I played Brazilian music too in undergrad, and Afro-Cuban music. And here I was finally able to play that stuff with other people that did it at a high level. And then I think the thing that we all have to remember is, first of all, like, there's no such thing as world music. Like, even European music is world music. Or are they from Mars? I don't get it. That's like, we're all from the world. And that the one thing that I learned the most is, yes, you can explore different types of like world music, because especially as percussionists, everybody just expects you to play anything and accompany anything, and any instrument. You have to magically just know it all. And what I learned the most was that you have to approach all of these cultures with respect, not go into it thinking, oh my God, I'm an expert at Brazilian just because I play a little rhythm on the conga. Or I am a master santero from Cuba just because I've played bata. But you have to learn its history, and you have to learn where everything came from, and you have to be aware that it all came from suffering and the slave trade, and you have to be aware of all of that before you even like have fun with it and play all of it. And then you can understand it better. And then you can learn more rhythms, because that's what we do. We will always be asked to play something we don't know perhaps, and then we'll learn it. And I think as long as we approach it with respect for X culture that we're doing, and keep combining, keep trying to, you know, make people aware that there's other things and that we can sing English with Latin rhythms X and Y, then I think people will start understanding that classical and world, or classical and popular, can go together and should go together, and we can be aware of all these things. So, yeah.
And with that, I think that completely closes and encompasses everything that we're trying to talk about here. That's amazing, Stephany. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think what you just shared is really nailing it, about how important it is to recognize where music is coming from and where the bravery is coming from, because we are making music that is brave because of our stories, because of the story of the music that we play and sing. And because when we share those stories, people realize, oh, we actually have something in common. Remember when we went to, was it Anderson, Indiana? Last summer, we went to Anderson, Indiana, and I cannot think of a town that has less in common probably with the Latin American choir, but they asked us, they invited us to come over and share our music and share our story of Coro Latinoamericano, and we had a great time. And there was a lot of people that related to our music because of the stories. So I want to talk a little bit about stories and what is our story. Maybe you would like to share, when have you ever had to be like really, really brave in music and really risk it all, or feel completely vulnerable to achieve something? Who would like to answer that? Petar.
I can start, and then everyone else can pitch in with some ideas. I was thinking about that question when you posed it online, and I had actually a hard time defining anything that I do really brave. And I was thinking, why I don't feel brave? And she's bringing that question. And I realized that actually maybe the definition of bravery, what is brave in life, right? What do you consider something being brave? And thinking about that, I realized for me, the brave is something that I do in spite of my own fears. If I do things, if I'm afraid of something, and yet I go through and do it. But that may not be the brave for someone else that doesn't have a fear of that. So when you're asking me, when did I feel, when was it when I felt really brave? Every time I go on stage, I personally am afraid of stage. That's not something that I take as granted. Every time I go there, it's like a battle for me. I have to win over myself about my own demons. And for Bruno, stage may be a challenge where he feels very comfortable, a little excitement. You know, he wants to do his best, but he's not afraid of that. So he would say, well, I mean, that's nothing. I just go there and do my opera things. And so, you know, it's more about like, how do you personally feel about some things and what's really hard for you to do? And then what is it that in spite of being hard, you go through with it and you take the risk of failing? And how do you deal with that failure if it matters to you? So if you're asking in music, I wish I could say I was brave when I wrote a piece that was anti-government and they chased me and stuff like that, but that has never happened really. However, what happens every single time, I have it's described in music like a stage fright type of feeling, right? I'm not comfortable and I have to battle my own demons, my own personality, my own thinking about something, my own expectations, and I have to go through with it. And some people in that situation would freeze and couldn't go through with that if they had the same type of feelings. And I think I'm brave, but it's not like Bruno may not think I'm brave, or Daniel may feel so, or Stephany, they feel comfortable. They like doing it so much that it overcomes that feeling, so they don't have that much of a challenge. So it's really personal, I think. It would be very difficult to describe it in objective sense as a musician, because our line of work is not, we are not soldiers or doctors where we risk our lives, right? So there is always a lot at risk in some other professions, but that doesn't mean that this is easy for that same reason. If you're afraid of something, then, and you do it, you are brave by doing it. And that can be the same thing, like your previous question, when was it, if any of us had an issue with that someone authority would tell them, how dare you do that? Let's say a teacher, for example, or some reputable colleague, and they think that's not, so how dare you play that? And you spend all, and if that person is very much under influence of that reputable person and still does that, that's a brave person, right? But if you don't have someone like that, like I would really care less if someone would say, how dare you do that? Then in that particular case, it's not a bravery. So it's really context in which each one of us is put and how we go through with that.
Thank you very much, Petar. Let's hear Stephany and then Bruno.
I agree with what Petar said. I think it's how you overcome it, whatever it is. Like, it doesn't have to be in music, because I think all of us, I mean, we've all had to be brave or courageous at any point in our lives. We've all had to face challenges. I mean, that's no secret. And so to me, it's how you overcome it. How do you overcome that challenge? I think by pushing through and like ultimately overcoming it, we show how brave we are. We might not see it that way while we live it. And many times we have no choice but to like push through it. But when you look back, that's when you realize how brave you were during those times. And I mean, for me specifically, I can name many times when I've had to face a challenge. And they were hard, but probably not uncommon. Like, a lot of people just went through the same type of things. Like, I was talking to Venice a long time ago, and we were talking about how, for example, we first came into this country. It wasn't for college, it was when we were kids, and I was 14 and she went through it the exact same thing. And I came with my family to North Carolina for 1.5 years, and I had no idea how to speak English. And it was the middle of the school year, and I had to go to school and still have good grades. And I had bullies, and I had people just making my life miserable, and they were both natives and Latinos. And but I had to overcome it. Like, there was no way around it. What else could you do? I guess you can give up, but I had to learn English and still get good grades, and I did it. And I think the only thing that I was comfortable with was music, because I had done it back home, and that's the only thing that I knew. And that was the only thing that helped me push through it too. And actually, that's how I started with percussion, in fact. So those stories are not to be like, oh man, she suffered so much, let's all feel bad. it's to look back and then like see what you gained from those experiences and how brave you were. I mean, I have now I can speak English, and I have a point of view from this country and many opportunities that later on allowed me to come back here to the US and like you mentioned, study here and have this opportunity. That wasn't easy either, but I mean, that's what being stubborn, like you said before, that allowed us to go through with it and, you know, finish the one dream that we have of becoming musicians. And it was hard. I can't think of like any semester when I didn't know that how I was gonna pay for next semester. Or like I had my first 2 years, I had one job and I was making $400 and my rent was $400 and I was eating one meal per day. And that was like, what else can you do? You just have to push through it. You have to, sure, now I can call it, I was being brave, but it's how you overcome it. Like Petar said, whatever it is, it's how you overcome it.
Thank you, Stephany. That's amazing. Thank you. Bruno.
What else can you say after that? I agree completely.
Be brave,
I think,
Bruno.
both Stephany
Be brave.
and Petar's message, and I agree. And I just have to add something. Petar, I'm with you. Like, it's funny for me, the idea of being brave, especially as you mentioned, as musicians. Anytime I'm come on stage, I'm freaking out. There are so many things because we are being vulnerable. Anytime you put anyone on stage, we're being vulnerable, no matter how fantastic, no matter how great you are, no matter how many times you've rehearsed. What if in the middle of the most beautiful line, I forget the words? What if I crack the high note? There are so many questions that we never know. And those, I think, the uncertainty just keeps you going. And just like you mentioned, and Stephany mentioned, I think the idea, the notion of being brave, most of the time is never with you during the moment you are being brave. I think you realize after what all that you went through, how brave you were, because life threw you like a lot of challenges and you had to be brave because you had no other choice. And it's funny because when Petar was saying we are not brave in the same way that doctors, for example, right now, we are going through a pandemic. These people are facing challenges literally every day now with an insane virus going on. But at the same time, the more we have people fighting for other people's life in one side in the hospitals, more people are saying, I didn't know I depended so much on music. So at the same time, I feel very important that through me, some people can get some kind of peace, some kind of comfort, and especially for the role of church, taking charge, being ahead of that, say, no, we are still the church, we're still here. So the church is also taking a stand, say, that's the time for us to be Christians and actually try to live what we preach. So it's all the definitions and the idea of bravery, just like Petar and Stephany said, it's very personal. But most of the time, you only realize that you were brave after. You were brave pretty much. Because, for example, right now, Petar, just your life can be like a sign or a symbol of bravery for a little boy who is in Serbia right now learning to play guitar and say, I found this guy on YouTube. He's amazing. And one day he decided to go to the United States and he's a fantastic guitar player. He's my symbol of bravery and I want to be just like him. So just the fact that being who you are can be a sign of bravery for some other people, not just for yourself. So just like they mentioned, it's very subjective, the idea and definition of bravery.
Thank you so much, Bruno. Venus, and then I will ask you one question.
Well, I was just going to say, going off of what all of you said, I think what Stephany mentioned is an experience that I think all of us in this forum have in common. I I think many of us didn't see it as bravery at the time. But if you think about it, the act of being a performing artist is willfully putting yourself in a position to be othered. And that's something that all of us have plenty of experience with. I always think back to, you know, my first experiences, which Stephany already gave us a taste of that. We went through very, very parallel experiences, except I came when I was 11 instead of 14, but the same issue with bullies, the same issue with feeling like you have to catch up. I believe, which to me in particular, because I'm such a control freak, is terrifying. And honestly, I always think back, I mean, we always hear that bravery is not the absence of fear, it is the courage to act in spite of it. And I always think back to so many of the experiences that I had at that point where, you know, you hear the phrase, ni de aquí ni de allá, neither from here nor from there. And bravery is a very simple choice that, as you all stated, we don't really see as bravery at the time. It is a choice to continue being yourself. It is a choice to continue bettering yourself. It is a choice to decide to be a part of something bigger than yourself, while at the same time never losing your sense of self. And understanding, I am from here and from there, soy de aquí y de allá. And I always think back to a phrase that my grandmother used to say, which is, no vengo a ver si puedo, porque puedo vengo. I'm not here to see if I can, I'm here because I can. And knowing that you need yourself in order to persevere. And all you need is to continue going. You don't really see it as an act of bravery, ever. Because living life sometimes, living through this is brave. Staying positive, staying united, not letting everything crumble around you in itself can be a lot of bravery. Not feeling powerless can be brave. So I think that's something, bravery is something that most of the world right now really has in common.
Absolutely, Venus. Thank you so much. I love everything that you're sharing. It makes so much sense. It makes so much sense in these times that we're living and in our context, not just as performing musicians, but as church musicians. I think one of the greatest things about working with all of you is that when you come to work, you don't see it as another gig. I know you don't, because I see the way you play. I feel the passion. I feel the joy with which all of you play, and the love and the care. Um, I know that it's different. It's not just another gig for you guys, and that's why I wanted to talk to you in this context and have this conversation. One question that I have is, so what do you think are the challenges that we're facing? I mean, before we even started with all this pandemic crisis, we were already in a crisis about values here in this country and also in our own Latin American countries. We were in a crisis of racism, separation, division. Uh, is that still part of the challenge? What is the challenge in church that we are facing when we're trying to do worship and music with bravery? What do you think is the challenge? Or the challenges, if there are more than one? Petar, you need to unmute. There you go.
In particular, with this, what we do at CCC, I think the biggest challenge is, or actually was, maybe still is, but I think it just was, that we understand our role there. And I think I talked to a few people about that although we are, as you described us, as high-level classical musicians and stuff like that, I don't think that our role is really to showcase our abilities. We are the biggest challenge is to be a functional musician in this case. How do you serve rather than being showcased? How do you get away with that natural artistic personality that we all have to have in order to survive? So you have to have that desire to showcase, to be watched and play for other people. So how do you overcome that and suppress that in a situation that is just not calling for it? On just the contrary, it asks you to be a servant for something. And in this case, serving to God or serving to congregation or serving particular cause or message of the song. But it's not, so that's a challenge. And I've seen when we brought guest musicians sometimes, I've seen that they cannot really grasp that essential concept that as a church musician, you do need to understand your role and why are you there? And then with that framework, get the best of your abilities rather than trying to show off what you can do and ask to be liked or listened or enjoyed. I think the challenge is how do you overcome that and really serve? And we, in this case, we serve our congregation and our choir. And although they see us as and I can tell that they see us as professionals, they look up to us. I think in this case, it should be just the opposite. I mean, they are volunteers that show up on every rehearsal, every Sunday, and we are paid musicians, right? So in this particular context, they're ahead of us in this sense. So we are trailing or supporting them to do that work. And I think for a lot of musicians, that can be a challenge. I don't know what everyone else thinks, but.
Thank you. No, that's very true. Yeah, we can talk about challenges, not just as musicians there, but also within the church in general. Do you sense there are other challenges that we need to overcome? Daniel, share with us. You're mute.
You're mute.
Yeah, I think there is a challenge to make choirs such as the one that we serve to become respected and to become essential parts of congregations around the country. A choir that's formed by minorities, right? A choir that's formed by professional musicians and volunteers. A choir that sings some classical music, majority of popular music, that presents different rhythms, different styles, different points of views in music. How to make that respected and part of the congregation. Luckily here, we had, due to a lot of Yuri's work, things really changed here in the choir that we play for. Really became really important parts of what the cathedral is, right? Was not always the case, but like through Yuri's work, the previous dean, Steve, now Dean Mary as well, but like really building up the culture that a choir can be either professional or volunteer, and it can become essential parts of a congregation. So I think that's a challenge from what we see around the country, right? Not all churches have the luck to have such thing, to have such situation where you have the supports to express, artistically your philosophy as well. So I think that's clearly one thing that, regardless, previous to before COVID and after COVID, it's gonna be something that musicians are gonna have to work to establish. And I think that's why I think that choirs such as the ones we have here are so important, because long term they can really define literally the philosophy of an institution such as the ones we have. So I think moving forward after this, it's going to continue to be a challenge and to be respected. We know that, certain churches, volunteer choirs like this cannot sing in the same spot as a professional choir, like in the altar, or it cannot even participate in official celebrations. So this is certainly a challenge.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It truly is a blessing working with this choir. And so our choir, for people who are going to see this conversation and don't know this, we are kind of the base of the choir, but we have 16 to 20 volunteers that come and sing with us every week. And they are from all over the continent. Truly, we have 2 people who are American, but everybody else is from different countries. I just think they are such an example. Each of them is such an example of bravery, of what it is and what it means to make music and to make worship bravely. It truly is a blessing working for them and serving them. They are our most important musicians.
Desde valles y montañas, hoy venimos a adorarte, hoy venimos a exaltarte, mi Señor. En ti está la fortaleza, en ti vive la esperanza, y tu pueblo en tu victoria es vencedor.
Los que pasan por quebradas muy oscuras, aquellos que tengan dudas, suban hoy al monte Sión.
El que sana, el que libera, el que restaura, está aquí, está su gracia, suban hoy al monte Sión. El que quiere un nuevo amanecer, que se acerque a Dios, que confíe en Dios, que se acerque al fuego. El que quiere un nuevo amanecer, que se acerque a Dios, que confíe en Dios, que se acerque al fuego. Porque todo lo que toca lo transforma, nos inspira con su gloria, adoremos al Señor.
Alabemos con el arpa y el pandero, construyamos hoy su reino, que es el reino del amor.
El que quiere un nuevo amanecer, que se acerque a Dios, que confíe en Dios, que se acerque al fuego. El que quiere un nuevo amanecer, que se acerque a Dios, que confíe en Dios, que se acerque al fuego. Majestuoso que a tu pueblo has preparado, anunciándole tu gracia, vida eterna y bendición.
Alabemos con el arpa y el pandero, construyamos hoy su reino, que es el reino del amor.
El que quiere un nuevo amanecer, que se acerque a Dios, que confíe en Dios, que se acerque al fuego. El que quiere un nuevo amanecer, que se acerque a Dios, que confíe en Dios, que se acerque al fuego. El que quiere un nuevo amanecer, que se acerque a Dios, que confíe en Dios, que se acerque al fuego. El que quiere un nuevo amanecer, que se acerque a Dios, que confíe en Dios,
is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures and leads me beside still waters. He revives my soul and guides me along right pathways for his name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You spread a table before me in the presence of those who trouble me. You have anointed my head with oil, and my cup is running over. Surely your goodness and mercy shall follow me